What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Meaning of Podcast. I am Ace.
This is RB3.
And this is the podcast where we talk about your favorite film directors and the deeper meaning within their movies. And this one is another special episode in honor of Alita Battle Angel, which is coming out this weekend. We are talking about Robert Rodriguez, Mr. Austin native himself. Latino director Robert Rodriguez. We're going to be going through his filmography. This guy obviously had a rise up in the 90s, so it's going to be a lot of fun because I grew up with a lot of his films. A lot of them are more fresh in my mind than others, just like RB3. Some of them might be a little more fresh in their heads than others.
Well,
but we'll get into it.
Well, I mean, similarly, I grew up on his movies, but I think you grew up more on this horror genre stuff, and I grew up more on his kids' movies.
Hey, man, Spy Kids, bro.
Yeah.
How old were you when you saw Spy Kids? Like 2?
Yeah, I was probably at least.
I was little when I saw Spy Kids.
The only one I saw in theaters was Spy Kids 3D.
Wow, that's wild to me because I grew up on Spy Kids, man. Spy Kids is on a different level, bruh. But I mean, it's crazy. I mean, we're obviously gonna get into it, but how do you not know this song?
I mean, I've seen these movies.
Steve Buscemi going crazy in the back.
Hey man, I've
got Machete.
I've seen these movies a bunch of times, but I mean, when I was just like a kid. You know? But I actively try not to remember my childhood. So.
This guy was that bad? Was it that bad?
No, man, it wasn't bad. Just I try not to harp on the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting, his type of filmography and what he's done.
Yeah, it's like 50-50. It's like 50-50 cartoonish horror movies and cartoonish kids movies, which is actually an amazing feat to pull off for being able to make a consistent thing off of that.
Well, look at the director we talked about last week, Sam Raimi.
Yeah,
he's the kind of guy, like we talked about how he can make a movie like Spider-Man. And then he can make a movie like Evil Dead.
Yeah,
Evil
but
Dead
I mean, he had to evolve to that, you know, whereas Robert Rodriguez is kind of just making. I mean, I guess he does later in his filmography is the Spy Kids and the Shark Boy and Lava Girl and stuff like that. But like, I'm sure like, it seems like just based on what he was making before, he always kind of had that heart for. Like children-esque entertainment. So he said, well, for me, when I read out into his filmography, a lot of it's like very nostalgia-based, in the same way that Tarantino is. And we're going to talk about how Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez kind of link and interact as well. But you know, Tarantino's whole thing is taking the B-movie genres of his childhood and then making that and presenting that to the mainstream, putting that to the forefront. That's the same thing that Robert Rodriguez does, but on a much cheaper level per se, like, on a much and in a less. I mean, I don't want to say in a less. It's in a more homage-ish kind of way. It's in a more of a kind of a parody of the genres that the B genres that influenced his childhood. So
you don't think Tarantino does that too, though?
No, I don't think.
Really, Kill Bill?
It's not a parody, but it's not like. I say it's
pretty cartoonish.
But it's cartoonish, but it's also, you can align that with a lot of those movies. And it feels, for me, it's more polished than a lot of Robert Rodriguez movies are, and that's, you know. And from, you know, the lack of polish kind of adds this level of campiness that does kind of appeal itself to the more of the drive-in theater aesthetic, the older kind of, you know, like I said, B-level genre aesthetics. Tarantino has been fortunate enough to have like a much bigger budget for a lot of his movies. So then his movies look a lot more polished. They feel a lot more polished, and they not only just, and you know, for me at least, Tarantino's movies not only take from the genres, but it kind of evolves those genres as well. Whereas I don't feel like Robert Rodriguez. I mean, no disrespect to Robert. I'm saying like I love this guy, you know what I mean? But I'm just saying like
it's not at the level of Tarantino.
But yeah, it's not like, I'm not saying it's different. I'm not saying they're at different levels. I'm saying they're doing completely different things. You know?
Okay.
I'm saying that Robert Rodriguez is paying more of an homage, more of incorporating that stuff into his filmography, and you know, I guess I use parody. Parody's not the right word, but kind of pay homage and you know, represent that on screen, whereas Tarantino is actively trying to evolve that genre into his own Tarantino-isms.
Yeah, it's a very. I like how we're starting out with this conversation because that's literally what I was thinking as I was rewatching some of these movies. Was the fact that it's crazy how someone like a Robert Rodriguez can be good friends with someone like a Tarantino, and they're both kind of doing the same thing, but one of them is regarded as one of the greatest directors of all time, and the other one is kind of brushed off as making kind of silly, funny movies, right? I don't. But you're saying they're making two different things, so maybe that's the reason why.
I mean, I feel like they're making two different things, and I also feel like.
Because Tarantino does very like B movies, homages to silly kind of movies.
Well,
and so does Robert. But Tarantino is like GOAT, and Robert Rodriguez is like not.
Well, for me,
for most people, for most cinephiles.
Well, I think particularly with Tarantino, I think his whole thing is the mixing of the genres. I think that's where Tarantino kind of gets to more of an elevation kind of thing. He very much like he'll make a movie like. He'll make a movie like, let's say, Django, that is a Western, but it's also a blaxploitation movie, but it's also a it's a lot of things,
Yeah.
Whereas a Robert Rodriguez movie is just like, for example, like Desperado is mainly a Western movie, a Western kind of genre movie. From Dusk Till Dawn Dusk Till Dawn's a little bit of a mixture of both, but then again, that's written by Tarantino, so it's a little bit. It's a little bit different. But, it's also, I think Tarantino, he gets a lot more praise because they both came out around the same time, but I guess people saw him as more of the amateur guy, as the guy who didn't go to film school and taught himself and worked at a VHS store. And he has a story that sounds so unique and out there. Whereas Robert Rodriguez, he actually did go to film school. Sure. He actually produced his own movies and made, put his money together and made his movies. Whereas Tarantino just kind of had things like fall in his lap.
Sure.
I don't want to say fall in his lap, but he had a different type of opportunity. Apparently, the story is with Tarantino that he knew Harvey Keitel's wife's like yoga instructor or something like that. So then they met up. So Harvey Keitel ended up just meeting Tarantino, gave him the script for Reservoir Dogs, and boom, bada bat. But whereas Robert Rodriguez, he actually did go to film school. He went to UT, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But he pays a lot. He pays a lot more homages to genres that aren't necessarily as widely accepted and hip in current U.S. society as well.
Yeah, so. I had a conversation with you, and let's start out with this. Last week or 2 weeks ago, when I was talking about Alita, and I was talking about the concept of kind of what's happening now as far as diversity and when it comes to representation of characters in media, specifically with Black Panther being the perfect example of something that shows a Black character being not only a superhero, not only a badass, but not being a down on his luck drug addict or a slave
yeah.
or a guy who needs help from a white guy. Like he is his own man and he is his own superstar. Like he is, king of Wakanda. He's got his shit together, for lack of a better term. And I've been saying I'm missing that when it comes to Latino representation, especially over the past 15 years. The only types of representation we've been getting are either lame supporting characters or evil drug dealers who cut off people's heads and laugh. Like we were talking about Breaking Bad last week, and I love that show. It's an amazing show.
I don't know if we talked about it.
I yelled about it.
Yeah, but I don't know if it was on this episode.
I'm saying off camera we talked about it. Okay. Off camera we talked about it, and I love the show. But I told you it's an awful representation of Mexicans, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. Like that's the stereotype: the white guy fighting against the evil Mexicans. That's the kind of stuff that we've been getting over the past 15 years. Like name any movie that's a Mexican guy who has the power, the support, the backing, kind of like a Black Panther, kind of like a King of Wakanda, someone who has his own. And I was saying that in the future, the kind of filmmaker I want to be is the kind of filmmaker who's putting Latinos in the forefront and putting Latinos in a different light and putting Latinos. I told you, let's go back to the times of making a Latino badass. Let's make a bandolero. Let's make a Mexican gunslinger, right? And the first example I have of that is Robert Rodriguez. He is the guy who said, you know what? I'm going to make a movie in Mexico. I'm going to make it dirt cheap, and I'm going to make it just because I want to see Latinos in this badass role. And he made El Mariachi, which cost $7,000 to make, which is ridiculous.
That's insane.
And if you see this movie, I've seen most of it. It's so ridiculously like, I don't know. What I highly recommend people to do, especially for this episode, is go on YouTube and search Robert Rodriguez Film School or 10-Minute Film School from Robert Rodriguez. I don't know if you've done that.
Well, I've seen a lot of his shows. The Director's Chair. He has a show called Director's Chair.
Yeah.
He also has this whole network, the El Rey Network.
Yeah, he does.
Which is actually a very common staple in my household. Like I said, my grandma's a very big karate movie fan. That's really the only network that's like really putting out those like old
kung fu movies.
Yeah,
he loves that. That's one of the things that he grew up on, and he adored those kind of movies. But El Mariachi is like again dirt cheap. He shot it, and the way he describes it, it's amazing. Like he had everything in mind as far as how can I make this as cheap as possible. Obviously, the biggest thing we can talk about when it comes to Robert Rodriguez, even Tarantino, but specifically Robert Rodriguez, it's the zooms. My God, how many zooms are in Desperado, El Mariachi, Once Upon a Time in Mexico? Almost all his movies have ridiculous zooms that are funny, in my opinion. But in this movie, he cuts around his zooms, and he does everything in one take. And the way, so he cuts, he zooms, and instead of moving the camera and doing a different take, he would use his zoom almost as like a transfer to edit. And he had his edits in mind. That's the main thing I got from all his film school videos was that. To me, that's crazy. Where you're shooting the movie, everything in a first take to save money, and then you just zoom in to create different effects. Like that is like, if anything, that's the most basic style of like someone who just picks up a camera and makes a movie. And that's kind of what he did.
Right. And yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, film school is usually an opportunity to like experiment with a lot of different ways with the camera and stuff like that. So, I mean, he definitely developed his aesthetic and like his style very early on. And it's a style to say the least. Like he has a very distinct, very clear, when you're watching a Robert Rodriguez movie, you know when you're watching a Robert Rodriguez movie.
Let's break it down. What do you qualify as his style? What are the bullet points?
Right. I mean, I'd probably say he's great with editing. I think the editing in his movies are always, you know, for me, I think of a lot from Dusk Till Dawn. I think of Desperado. They're very fast moving films. And they're cheesily edited, but in a fun way, you know, like they're cut in a way that is almost like the Edgar Wright or the, you know, we talked about Sam Raimi, the fast cut transitions to heighten the drama, and particularly for Robert Rodriguez films, a lot of his movies are a little on the lower budget side, so those edits really do a lot to intensify the feel of his movies. So I think he's great with that. I also think like you said, the zooms, the crazy zooms. I think from a thematic standpoint, or maybe not from a thematic standpoint, but just from his overall production design, from his costume design, he goes for the most bizarre, you know, kind of look, for the most bizarre-ish kind of take on any story. I mean, Spike is like the clearest example of like dumbhead people, and you know these weird flying pigs. I mean, they're just he maximizes creativity, and he maximizes the bizarreness. So then, you know, and some people say that he attributes that, you know, he does that he exploits creativity in order to distract you from how cheap the movie actually looks. But I think that's not. I don't think that's exploitative. I think that's great. I think that's genius. I think that's what filmmaking is, because he harkens back to a lot of those old B genre movies that didn't have any money either, but they still made a great and entertaining movie. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he talks a lot about his editing in the videos that I was mentioning before. He talks about it in the way of like energy, where he says, I want energy.
Energy, that's what I was looking for.
And I don't want to stay on something for too long. I want it to keep moving is what he talked about. It's funny, the different types of filmmakers that we can talk about, where we talk about people directors that love oneers and that really stay on.
Alfonso Cuarón is another Mexican. But you know, Robert Rodriguez is Mexican American, so it's a little bit of a different thing between when we're talking about Alfonso Cuarón or Iñárritu or Guillermo del Toro, who do have their own kind of distinct. I mean, all four of these directors have very distinct styles, but it's just, you know, you can see definitely that Robert Rodriguez approaches his movies from a more Americanized perspective, to say the least.
Yeah, it's so. I guess that's maybe why I connect with him in a certain way. Is because I was born in America too, but I have that you know, Mexican background and Colombian background, and also we both grew up in Texas. Something that I always felt that connection towards, where, you know, he was born in San Antonio. I live very close to San Antonio. I was talking about before we went on air or went on camera was the fact that I grew up in border towns. I grew up in McAllen, Texas, which is a border town, and then I grew up in El Paso, which is another border town. But I grew up in a very weird Texas Mexican Latino community. So it's all Latinos, but a lot of Mexicans. And we have kind of our own identity. That's why Selena was huge when I was growing up, right? So that story blew up. So he kind of grew up in a very, very similar period that I am in. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying as far as being different than traditional Mexican filmmakers who are very much more artists.
Yeah,
artists.
Yeah, the art, you know, and you know, it's the difference between having American movies as your access. It's the difference between having access to American movies or having the movies be imported, right? Like, I'm sure if you're living in Mexico, like Alfonso Cuarón, like Guillermo del Toro, you have a very specific, like, few movies that are imported to you, so you have a very limited range. Whereas Robert Rodriguez has, you know, he's in Texas, particularly in somewhere like Texas, where there is still that drive-in movie theater culture, where there still is the playing of you know, genre pieces and B movies. That probably influenced him. That probably influenced a lot of Robert Rodriguez's style, as opposed to something like a Guillermo del Toro, who watches imported American movies that, you know, wouldn't have as many access. But you know, a lot of times people who live in other countries have a lot more access to more worldly cinema than Americans too, though. So you probably saw more world cinema than, I'm sure. You know, I mean, in terms of like influence-wise, he probably was influenced more by world cinema per se, I think, than maybe Robert Rodriguez is.
Yeah, and it's if you hear the stories of Alfonso and Iñárritu and even Guillermo del Toro, they talk about how they have this connection and all. Like, I know, I think Cuarón is from DF, and it's, dude, and I always say this, but DF is like a whole different world. It's like, it's the LA of Mexico, where, I mean, in a certain way, it's more like the New York of Mexico, where it's so everything is art and paintings and drawings and tradition and colors and like ancestry of the Mexicans and all this kind of stuff that's in DF. It's very different than the rest of Mexico, which is much more traditional and not, you know, crazy. Like, everything is art in DF. Like, they love art. It's ridiculous. Versus someone like you just said, Robert Rodriguez, who's not necessarily in that world, in that lifestyle. He grew up more maybe on fun action movies or something like that, or kung fu movies. But my biggest takeaway, starting out the conversation and going through his filmography, is what I was saying to my mom as before we started recording this episode. I told my mom about Robert Rodriguez, and the biggest thing that stands out to me of him, and the biggest thing that I kind of identify with, being in this city and being in Hollywood and being a filmmaker or being whatever I'm going to be as far as my future holds, right? Whether it be in production, whether it be behind the scenes, in front of the camera, whatever it is, I have that same ideology, that same theme that Robert Rodriguez seems to have throughout his filmography, and that is Latinos first, Latinos in front of the camera, Latinos behind the camera, Latino-driven content. And that's the first thing that stands out to me with his movies and with his ideas. I want to make a Latino badass who can kick ass, take names, take the girl, and beat the bad guy. That's the kind of content I want to make. I want to put us in a light that makes us look appealing to other people. People can say, man, that guy's he's dope, and he's a Latino guy. Like, that's the biggest thing that stands out with me when he makes El Mariachi, which is his first movie that came out in 1992. And that's the staple that he wanted to make getting into Hollywood to say, hey, look, I think it was Miramax. Hey, look, Miramax, I can make movies. I can make it fun. I can make it different. And I can put a Latino guy, which is something you really haven't seen. And then from there, he gets enough money to get Desperado, which is Antonio Banderas, Salma Hayek, a much bigger cast, right? And he's one of the first
1,000 times the budget is the original.
Yeah, and it's one of the first times I was talking to my mom about Antonio Banderas. Like, he wasn't as big back in this time period. I think it was 95, 94.
I mean, I think this movie kind of put him on the map. If I'm not
put him
mistaken.
on the map. Yeah, same with Salma Hayek too, right? Because Salma Hayek, before this, people didn't really know who she was. I really do feel like people like Antonio Banderas, people like Salma Hayek, kind of owe a little bit to Robert Rodriguez as far as he's kind of the one that put him into the forefront, put him into the light. And I think that's the biggest standout for his content is putting those Latinos in the front.
Whereas Tarantino kind of uses older, washed up talent and brings them to the forefront. Rodriguez recruits a lot.
He does. He wants
talent.
to find that talent, and he loves putting in different people in different roles, and I think that's what stands out too. I mean, obviously Cheech is in this movie as well, and Tarantino makes an appearance.
Yeah.
I mean, Steve Buscemi is in this movie.
I love the opening scene with Buscemi.
Yeah.
Like, I just love when he sits down at the bar. He's like,
yeah. It's so over the top. I love how he keeps. Let's talk about Desperado. I love how he keeps referencing how everyone in this. Oh man, this place is full of classy people, real nice guys. He always keeps saying that about the guys behind him. But I don't know. What do you think of this movie, man? This movie's ridiculous. It's insane.
Yeah, no, it's fun. I mean, that's what the whole Mexico trilogy is. I mean, these are all revenge films too. You know, they are essentially like revenge movies about taking back. And you know, that's also it's in line with a lot of the genre conventions of revenge tales, but also subverts a lot of those conventions as well. It adds a little bit of a more comedic spin, or a little bit more of a I don't want to say accessible, but it's less angry than something like Taken per se. You know, it's much more of a fun. You know, I think that's why I love Robert Rodriguez. His purpose is not to like his thing is not like telling like this amazingly like I don't want to say not powerful story, but his thing is making entertainment. You know, his thing is making something that is just straight balls to the wall, fun, violence, sex, everything that you would kind of want. But then he subverts a lot of that stuff too. And like I said, it adds more comedic spin, especially with characters like Steve Buscemi and stuff like that.
And Tarantino.
And Tarantino, yeah.
He's ridiculous in this movie.
Well, he's ridiculous in any movie.
That's true.
I mean, especially...
That's the best thing you've ever said. That's so him and Django Unchained.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Oh my
God. That is ridiculous. Him in every movie that he cameos in.
Yeah.
His own movies too. And we're going to talk about From Dusk Till Dawn because he's like the co-star in that.
Yeah.
Basically, and that's mad
Good
creepy.
Lord.
But and again, he brought something different, and I think that's Miramax. Again, we have to, Harvey Weinstein is of course like the founder of it, and not to say I don't want to give this dude any credit, but the whole Miramax model outside of Weinstein too, the whole company's model was recruiting young talent, and in a very way in the way that you could have one movie and you could have a couple of shorts and you could still have the budget to make an actual film. Whereas, really, especially back, especially now, you have to have basically like a full filmography IMDb page fill out before any studio is going to roll the dice and giving you $7 million, $10 million. And you have to like Jordan Peele, for example. Jordan Peele had a whole TV show. And he still only had a $2 million budget for Get Out. But that's how it is. But back in the 90s, particularly, that's when the independent movement was starting to pick up, and it was different than back in the 60s and 70s, when like old school Hollywood people were coming out of film school. A lot of these people were not coming out of film school. They're like doing more amateur-ish stuff, like being more amateur and. But of course, like Robert Rodriguez went to film school as well, but he had much more of a homemade aesthetic, and he brought that with El Mariachi, and I think it's really commendable. I wish we could go back to those times where you can make, but everybody's trying to make movies now. So
yeah, it's an interesting time in Hollywood when it comes to budgets. I think that's so fascinating. What you just said is so true. Like this is the time where it's like, let's try it. Let's try this guy. Let's do this guy. Let's find talent. Now it's more like, can you make it for $2 million? Let's make it $1 million. It's like, bro, it's like, you know what? Just shoot it on your laptop. It's like, really?
I think even Black Klansman had like a $20 million budget or something like that.
The budgets are getting tinier and tinier. I mean, look at the movies, and the problem is they keep praising it, and they keep
$15 million.
Look at movies like Searching. Look at movies like, you see what I'm saying?
Yes, it is a lot.
That's what I'm saying. And then people are like,
Modern Family did that first, by the way.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, people look at it and they're like, oh, see, studios look at that movie and are like, see, we can make these movies for even cheaper, which is fine. I get it. That's probably what I would do. But at the same time, it's like, geez, like, we need some money to make a movie.
Right.
But the thing, I remember watching this movie when I was a kid and watching Desperado, and just the concept of me, just a mariachi singing, bandolero, gunslinging, dual-wielding badass. Sign me up.
This was Buster Scruggs before Buster Scruggs. He's singing songs in murder mode.
Yeah, man, and it's dope. I love the opening mariachi scene when his two homies are with him. And I love the concept of like this weird underground mariachi assassin league, kind of like a John Wick style of like.
I was gonna say John Wick.
These are like mariachis and they sing and they dance, but they also train to be badass assassins. I love that concept. I love the concept of Danny Trejo as like his machete throwing knives guy, like this weird assassin league organization, whatever it is that we don't really learn about too much in Desperado, coming to the forefront. I love that concept. The concept for me in general sells the entire movie. That and obviously Salma Hayek. Right. It's such an old school throwback Western of like really, really hot girl, cool guy, gunslinger, finds girl, hook up, and then they go on to dominate the world kind of concept, right?
Yeah. Do you think that's out of date now though? Do you think that's
super out of date? Are you kidding me? I rewatched this movie. I was like, no way. This is not gonna fly in 2019. Nope.
No, I mean, I think I think. I
mean, the male gaze is strong.
Well, I was gonna say,
with Robert Rodriguez.
Well, I was gonna say, you know what? I think
it's a strong male gaze.
I think Robert Rodriguez. He both engages in the practice of the male gaze, but he also subverts it to almost to some extent too. Like
almost makes fun of it.
Yeah. I mean, literally, like all all the guns are basically like phallic instruments.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about From Dusk Till Dawn, but there's literally a dude who pulls out a fucking dick looking like gun,
and it's in freaking Desperado, man.
Yeah,
if you opens the case, you see it.
Yeah. It's this off the last. It was supposed to, all these OB movies are, and all these like exploitation movies, black exploitation. I'm sure the genres that Robert Rodriguez is taking from is more like westerns and stuff. But it's all the whole purpose of those old genres is to promote misogyny, is to promote
it's hyper masculine,
hyper masculinity, all that stuff. So I mean that's what he plays in, but he makes fun of it.
It's machismo at its highest, right?
Yeah,
especially the Mexican machismo is like, it's crazy.
Yeah, but he plays into it and he makes fun of it and he makes it funny.
Great.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, obviously this movie has a lot of great moments, a lot of great scenes. He has connections to the kid. The shootout at the end is a lot of fun. A lot of over the top moments. I think the bar shootout is still amazing. I think that's a lot of fun. I love when his two mariachi homies come in. And they start like, it's a machine gun inside a freaking mariachi guitar case. That is as like 6-year-old me thought that was the coolest thing ever. Like that concept to me, I was like, yo, that's badass.
Some other movie did that recently too, right?
Did it?
I think I don't know. Let me look that up.
I don't know. Did it? I mean, obviously, Once Upon a Time in Mexico, but that's a follow-up.
Yeah. I'll look it up.
I don't know. They might have done that.
Yeah, I think I don't know, but I might be tripping. Maybe a TV show.
But either way, man, Desperado, I think this movie is a lot of fun. Obviously, it's a revenge tale, and the ending is kind of dark or whatever, but they still end on a happy note as far as them going off into the sunset, riding along. But yeah, it's got a lot of great moments. It's got a lot of great bits, I guess is what a good way to call it. The scene where the guys are coming into the bed and you could see them in the shadows. That's a great moment in just filmmaking in general.
No, 100%. Yeah.
So I adore this movie.
And he even follows that up with From Dusk Till Dawn,
which is his next movie.
Another Tarantino collaboration.
1996.
He did 4 Rooms before that, but he only did a segment in that too. But yeah, having Tarantino cameo in Desperado and actually be the writer from Dusk Till Dawn.
They're friends. They're buddies.
Yeah,
man.
they're good friends. And this was apparently the first script that Tarantino actually ever sold. So it was sold before he became famous, and he apparently sold it for like $15,000. But then I guess when he started having a certain amount of clout after Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction and Robert Rodriguez, of course, Desperado and El Mariachi and all that stuff, it was kind of like a collab made in heaven. I mean, for 2 B-movie lovers.
Did you see Full Tilt Boogie, the behind-the-scenes documentary of this movie?
I did not. No.
Have you heard of it?
I haven't heard of it, no.
It's really, really interesting. That's kind of the best way to put it. But this was Robert Rodriguez really wanted. Obviously, Tarantino wrote himself into this movie, and he was supposed to have like a cool brother to kind of go along with him. It's funny because I was watching an interview on Jimmy Kimmel when he said that Quentin Tarantino really wanted Robert Blake to be his brother.
Really?
Yeah, and then he suggested George Clooney, and he's like, nah, he's too much of a pretty boy. George Clooney is like, too pretty for this role, is what Tarantino wanted. Tarantino said, I'm sorry, and Robert Rodriguez kept insisting on Clooney. So he set up a meeting with him and Tarantino and Clooney, and apparently Clooney was like on a bike and had boots on, and he really wanted to break out of his like ER fame and ER box that he was in. And Robert Rodriguez was like, hey, I want to make you the star of my movie and make you like a mean, badass kind of dude, really pushing away that audience that's kind of following you from ER and truly show your range. And he tricked Tarantino to pick him because he kept saying like, man, you kind of look like you can be brothers, man. And you kind of look alike. And he imitates his Tarantino impression is incredible.
Really?
It's so good.
George Clooney's or
no, Robert Rodriguez. It's so good. He's like, oh, really, man? Okay. And he does it so well. But he talks about that. And then eventually, obviously, you have George Clooney coming into this role. The behind the scenes is insane for this movie, man. Yeah. It's George Clooney when he's feeling himself, bro. He's gassed up like freaking hot air balloon.
That was before Batman and Robin.
Oh, bro, he's George Clooney at his hot. The entire documentary is basically about like how many girls he can sleep with and how many and who wants to sleep with him. It's so like it's insane. Like this would not fly now. As far as his attitude on set, it's so like over the top. But the whole set environment is very like we just talked about, very like hyper masculine, very like. There's a scene when the extras in the bar, the guy extras in the bar are whistling at the girl extras, and this is behind the scenes. Like this is candid moments, right? This isn't like rehearsed, and you could tell like that's the energy that they had on set. Very hyper masculine, very machismo, very like, oh, you look at that hot girl, what up, girl? Like catcalling. Like there was a lot of just watch the documentary and it shows you like, man, there's a lot of catcalling on set. This would not fly. And again, it's very interesting to say the least. But as far as movie wise, what do you think of this movie, man? You just I rewatched it. It's on Netflix, right?
Yeah, it's on Netflix. Yeah. No, I actually really enjoy this movie.
It's ridiculous.
It's totally ridiculous.
I mean, Desperado is it can fit. It can make it work. I can see this to be a trilogy. From Dusk Till Dawn to me is much more, like you said, a very clear throwback to a B movie.
Yeah, right. And I definitely feel like, at least for me, like it's very clear that like they had a. It feels like Tarantino wrote this, but he didn't really like. I guess it felt like as soon as his character pieced out, almost like his script pieced out too. You know what I mean? Like it was almost like a different. But I think it's great. I think it's actually a cool mixture of seeing Tarantino.
It's a Western horror. genre.
Yeah. That's the only time he's ever really done a science fiction / horror-esque type genre.
Sure.
And especially now, I think I say this. I don't say this on the show a lot, but I say this all the time privately. I think now when people say genre movies, that's the new code word for B movie. That's the new code word for the throw it away type. But this is the first time I think that Tarantino truly embraces the horror and the sci. I think he also played. I mean, I love Hateful Eight personally, but a lot of people don't. But I think he personally plays with horror a little bit there too in that movie. A lot of people don't think so, but I think but I think in that, I think From Dusk Till Dawn is very clearly it's a very clear example of what Tarantino's writing looks like, along with him being on the sidelines for a lot of days too. Because we see movies like what's the one that Oliver Stone did, Natural Born Killers, that is a Tarantino script, but Oliver Stone hacked it to death. But you see something like True Romance, where it's a Tarantino script, but Tony Scott was very faithful to it. This is a movie that's a Tarantino script, but also Tarantino's on set, but he's not directing it. So it's like you can see his influence directorial wise a little bit, but you can also see his influence. But you can also see Robert Rodriguez's influence, like I said, with the editing, with the camera work, with the over the top vampire effects, and So I really I know you're a big vampire fan.
I am.
So you got to go off on this movie.
I do, man. It's very interesting. I love vampires. The vampires it's one of my favorite genres of movies. It's one of my favorite creatures in general. Yeah. Like I have random thoughts of vampires in the night. No, I'm playing.
Hey,
but yeah, this movie is it's insane, man. I love watching the behind the scenes too, where you could see Robert Rodriguez is so chill on set. It's insane. He's so chill. Like for a director, I'd be freaking out half the time. But half the movie,
some Texas boys.
Half the time, he has a guitar and he's playing it on set. Like unironically, he's just playing the guitar. He's like, yeah. Let me change the lens. Give me a different. And he's like, oh, you know what? Can we pan over here instead? And he's playing the guitar as he's giving directions to the cam op and to the first AD. It's insane. It's completely insane, the fact that he's so chill. And they had a lot of issues when it came to the weather and all this stuff, and he adapts so well. And obviously he had a great first AD. Shout out to him. He's in the movie, in the documentary. But yeah, this movie, it deals with he really wanted to kind of push the edge, like be edgy and kind of make it an edgy movie, as far as the two protagonists being kind of assholes and not being the ones you want to root for necessarily.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially Tarantino's character, man. Like, if a character like that was on screen today, people would have canceled.
I mean, to be honest, bro, I feel like Tarantino just kind of wrote himself in.
You think Tarantino's a murderous rapist?
He's not a murderous rapist, but I think he's a little creepy, man.
Yeah, no, I mean the feet thing is definitely
weird.
Him. The feet thing is definitely him.
Yeah,
the feet is him.
Like, I don't know, man. Even watching Desperado, I'm like, bro, stop. Tarantino, I feel like he gasses himself up so much. He's like, bro, I'm Tarantino, man. I got this. I'm like, bro, chill.
It's funny. I heard from somebody who was who's in film school with me.
Yeah.
I forget exactly who, but they said one time they met Tarantino at a restaurant, and then literally they walk up to him, and for 20 minutes straight he goes on about like talking about himself.
Sounds like it, man.
Yeah, so I think that's funny, but it with a portrayal of a character like that being put into the forefront, it does bring up an interesting discussion of how redeemable can a character actually be, because I know for me, like watching this movie, I was ready for him to die just from after the first scene,
Not just that, because I think it's just kind of the annoying factor, for lack of a better term.
The annoying factor?
Yeah. Like, you're just kind of like, stop. Please.
The way he looks, I was like, damn, the way he was looking at the one homegirl when they and the camera got super close to him. But that's you look at something like the male gaze. You take the male gaze into account. That's something that he's playing. That's something that Robert Rodriguez is playing with in the form of this movie, and particularly a lot of time, particularly with Laura Mavi, who was the original writer of the male gaze theory. Her whole thing is the portrayal of women being cut off in body parts. So like how you see certain body parts, and literally the scene where he first meets the girl Kate, you see he looks at the feet, then he looks at her butt or whatever, then he looks at so it's different cut off. It's like he's actively playing in that in that category. So. Yeah, it's great. I think.
And speaking of that, I mean, the freaking Salma Hayek reveal with the snake and the dance.
Yeah,
it's iconic.
Yeah,
at this point.
Well, I'm sure that's what made her a star.
It's what made her a star. Absolutely.
I really didn't know.
Even my mom said it. It's like, what's that movie where she dances with the snake? That's what made her famous. And I was like, my mom said that, and I was like, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I did not know she was smoking like this.
Are you kidding me, bro?
Movie, man. Like,
it's Desperado.
Just
see her in Desperado.
Well, I saw this one before I saw Desperado.
Okay.
But I was like,
I mean, obviously in Desperado.
Yeah,
in Desperado, I'm just like, no, that's not real.
Well, she had a
that's not real. That's CGI.
But then
she's too like blows away like any kind of scales of rating.
I think that I love the way they edit the sex scene though. Like it's very much like the crossface
with the boots.
Yeah,
running across the body.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
That's funny. But yeah, in this movie, but that's another thing in Marvel's thing too. It's like it's either parts that are individually cut up, or it's the full like naked glorifying like image. Those are the two those are the two in betweens for sexualizing women. But I think Tarantino flips that almost to a certain extent too, and makes all of these gorgeous women vicious vampires, you know. And it really,
that was kind of the point.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why Robert Rodriguez has is a very, very unique approach to that stuff.
Absolutely. I just thought of something
What
stupid.
are you laughing at?
No,
What?
I'm not going to say it.
Man.
It's that idea, right, of like being like, oh, yeah, and then being like, oh, no. That's kind of the thought process behind it.
Yeah,
and it's funny.
It's like when you get catfished on Bumble or something, or Tinder. Like, oh, man, oof.
It's like those vines where it's like you see a girl from behind and you're like, okay, what's up, girl? And it turns around, it's a guy in a wig. You've seen those, right?
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of them.
Those are funny.
But and you know, it's kind of interesting to see a movie where like the horror objects in and of themselves are, I mean, again, he's paying homage to older B movies too. I mean, that's something that was also a criticism of like older kind of B movies, the vilification of women. A lot of cases, how, you know, sometimes in a lot of those old horror movies,
vicious sucking vampires.
Yeah. But he's just
making actual vicious.
He's making that out. But I mean, that's fun. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And like I say, he's making fun of a lot of stuff. So
and he follows this up with a movie that I remember as if it were yesterday, called The Faculty. My God, RB3. I just showed you the trailer for this movie. I literally told you, because you said you've missed a few of his movies. I was going to say, if you watch any of them, watch The Faculty. That's the highest recommendation I can give you for a Robert Rodriguez movie.
Coming of age high school movie. Yeah.
It's insane. I remember watching this movie when I was like 7 or 8 years old. 1998, I was 7 years old. I was 7 years old when I was watching this movie, or 8. I could have been 8 because I think I saw it on TV.
Right.
And this movie scarred me. It absolutely scarred the crap out of me. I just clearly having that impression of being absolutely scared and afraid, but absolutely enthralled and pulled in as far as the story and the concept of it, right? It's so outlandish and so out there of like this alien presence with the combination of high school kids, with the combination of like this idea of like not just coming of age, but like coming into manhood kind of idea too, because that's the Elijah Wood character and the Josh Hartnett character. The idea of having this emotional and sexual connection to like a creepy alien from outer space, right? That kind of mixing of things. Oh yeah, that's clearly in the movie.
That was a part of the movie.
Oh, it's in the movie, man.
Oh, man.
But either way, man, it's this. It has this blend. I told you before, the best way I can describe it. It has a very Buffy feel to it, a Joss Whedon kind of Buffy feel.
To which I responded, I've never seen Buffy.
Never seen Buffy, man. Before. That hurts my heart. It really does. It's amazing. Buffy's incredible. Obviously, Buffy's on a different level than this. This is much more spoofier than Buffy is, because Buffy handles emotional connections a little bit better than this movie does, because Buffy has that perfect, like, heightened, over-the-top special effects horror that's very, very, very supposed to be over-the-top, goofy, funny kind of feel, but also has like an emotional connection to the character of Buffy and what she feels and all that. But it's supposed to be, I mean, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the concept, right? It's like a girl who's chewing bubblegum and who's like the dumb blonde who happens to be destined to kill demons and vampires. It's supposed to be super silly. That's why the first movie is very much that in itself. And that's the show itself kind of drew off that heightened concept of sci-fi horror comedy, right? That idea almost of blending those two genres and making it so ridiculous. But The Faculty is incredible, man. It's one of those movies that, again, brought in a lot of fresh new faces. The one that stands out to me, obviously, is Josh Hartnett. But the co-star of this movie is Elijah Wood as well. But you have Jordana Brewster. You have homegirl who played Jean Grey in the Singer movies. I forget her name.
Oh, Anna Paquin.
Yes. No, not Anna Paquin. She played Rogue. I'm talking about the girl who played Jean Grey. Remember the one who's...
Oh, I know you're talking about. Yeah.
She's in this movie.
I didn't know that.
Salma Hayek's in this movie. But what kind of makes it stand out to me is obviously it's insane and it's over the top, but it's the aesthetic of the movie. I saw a comment on YouTube that called it kind of this weird Lovecraftian design of the creatures, because it's all tentacle monsters, which, again, as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old me, it's like, nope.
Yeah, geez, what kind of movies are you
I know.
watch,
No, trust me, my parents did not let me watch it. I saw this at home when I was doing a weird... Back in the day, man, when the Sci-Fi Channel was just coming out, I think it was the Sci-Fi Channel, I might be wrong, they had this horror marathon. And I remember watching all these horror movies that absolutely scarred me, and I kept watching. And it was like a horror marathon, and I would watch this on TV as a kid, and I remember clearly watching. And it was like a Saturday morning or Sunday morning. It was something crazy. Like, it wasn't like late at night and me and my parents were watching these movies. This was like a Friday or Saturday morning, and I'm 8 years old and I'm watching this movie. But I clearly remember going back to it and having certain scenes that kind of draw from this, like I said, a hybrid of like an over-the-top high school story with a Lovecraftian, creepy creature design kind of meeting at the forefront. And it has incredible moments. Obviously, the one that stands out to me the most is the ending of the movie, where there's a chase scene of the evil alien creature going after the kids in the high school, and it's chasing all around the high school, and it looks incredible. Like the budget, as far as this one goes, it looks really well done. There's a scene where the creature jumps into the pool and swims alongside the homie who's running, and it's a really cool shot from above where you could see the creature change into, like, obviously embodying a beautiful woman and changing back into an ugly, disgusting creature. And that stands out to me as if it were yesterday, just purely based on aesthetic. But I love this movie, and I love how different it is from what Robert Rodriguez was doing before. I showed you the trailer. What are your thoughts, man?
I mean, it just seems like it seems very out there. I mean, I haven't seen the movie, obviously, but it seems like a very, very high school. Like, it seems like if I take anything from Dusk Till Dawn, it might be the first hour. I mean, maybe I'm guessing here, but the first hour is like a really pure high school movie. Then it turns left all of a sudden, or something like that. Yeah.
It's hysterical. It's amazing. It's so ridiculous. It's insane. I love it so much. But yeah, I highly recommend you check it out. And eventually he followed this up with 2001, we get finally the Spy Kids franchise.
Yeah, the trilogy made in 3 years. Can you believe that? He made 3 movies.
I mean, but it's a franchise though, right? Because didn't he do Spy Kids 4? And
oh, he did 4. Yeah, but that came much later.
Got it.
It wasn't even the same.
This is something that you can talk about though, right?
I could talk extensively about Spy Kids 3D.
Come on, man. What about Spy Kids 1?
I've seen it a lot when I was young, but I just don't remember a lot of it. I don't remember a lot of 2 either, but I do remember liking 2 more than 1.
Oh man, Spy Kids 1 is insane. I mean, the whole franchise is insane, but my God, if there's anything that I remember as a kid, it's these movies, these Spy Kids movies. Once again, I like how the movies are set in Austin. That's like the first thing that stands out to me, again, being a kid who grew up in Texas. And obviously, the biggest connection is having Antonio Banderas there to kind of pull that
adult audience.
Yeah, and pull in that kind of, you know, prestige as far as an actor goes, because at this point he is Antonio Banderas. He's much more of a recognizable actor. And then again, the story is putting the kids in a POV perspective. That's what Robert Rodriguez really wanted to do, and show that idea of this dream coming to life where your parents are secretly spies and you have all these cool gadgets and all these cool training that kids can really connect to and be like, oh, cool, like I can be a spy too. Look at all these cool gadgets I have, kind of concept to pull in kids into really enjoying this movie.
Yeah, and it feels, you know, like not as a slight against the movie, but I think almost intentionally, it feels like it's almost something that a kid will make as you know, if they had the budget to make a film like this. You know, it feels very much like, I mean, that's what I take away the most from these movies, particularly with Spy Kids 2 and 3. Those are movies that really like opened up like my imagination for like, yeah, this is something that, I mean, I remember, as you know, I've said this many times in this podcast, when I was a young kid, I wanted to be like an actor, you know, and movies like this were the reason because of it, because these movies do feel like something that I would envision as I was younger, something that I would, you know, something that would inspire a kid to activate his creativity, to use his creativity, but also something for adults to awe at the extreme amounts of imagery and creativity that's on use here. And I think, you know, for some extent that kind of excuses some of the some people would say the more flawed elements of the movies are. What
are the flawed elements?
Well, I mean, I haven't
silliness.
Yeah, I mean,
no, let's talk about the whole franchise. Spy Kids 1, Spy Kids 2.
Oh, well, I mean, I haven't seen a lot of Spy Kids 1 or 2 like recently. I mean, I think a lot about Spy Kids 3 because that was really one of the first 3D experiences I had, and it really kind of introduced me to the love of 3D that I have. I see almost every movie I can.
Wow, that's incredible. Because we're gonna talk about how, I mean, this is Spy Kids 3D is eventually what leads to Alita Battle Angel.
Yeah, well, it's really
because Alita Battle Angel is like all like 3D.
Let me give you the breakdown. Right. This is how it was when I was a kid. All right. When Spy Kids 3D came out, that was the first 3D movie from my generation to see. Wow. So then that really like put the idea of 3D into like a lot of our heads. You know?
That's a good point.
So then,
and me, it's like I'm a purist. We're trying to find showtimes last week for Alita Battle Angel, and they were all 3D showtimes. And I'm like, I can't. I honestly actively go out of my way to not watch a movie in 3D.
But you know, I hear Alita Battle Angel has some of the most beautiful 3D.
And I'm still probably not going to do it. I'm serious. Like I'm that guy who's like, nope, I'm good.
Yeah. No. But you know, this movie put the idea in the brain of a lot of people, and of course, Shark Boy and Lava Girl was also in 3D. But then I remember it wasn't until 2007 or 2008 when Meet the Robinsons came out from Disney, and they tried a limited run of the 3D, and I remember seeing that too because I was just like I said, I've always been like a 3D nerd, you know. So that movie came out in 3D, and then started the new wave of the technology because this one's still the purple and green glasses. Whereas Meet the Robinsons was more of the 3D technology that we're familiar with now. But this movie 100%. I mean, yeah, like I said, when I was a kid, like I saw this movie twice in Spy Kids 3D twice in theaters. And it's really the first movie to really incorporate I mean, other movies incorporate VR, but this is one of the first modern movies, I should say. One of the first like 2000s. I guess that's not true either. But a lot of movies incorporate VR, but this one
to make it like a video game feel.
This one was purely a video game, and the whole gimmick of the 3D was when you put on the glasses, you went into the video game.
Yeah,
so it was in 3D.
Interesting. That's such a good point. I mean, let me kind of.
Spy Kids 2 though is dope.
Spy Kids 2
it's like an elevation of the first one.
I love it, man. I mean, obviously, what stands out to me is what you're trying to say is that this feels like it's kids' movies made for kids. Yeah. Whereas, like, there's a lot of movies nowadays, the movies that I like whether it be Lego Movie or whether it be Coco, whether it be whatever Disney or whatever Spider-Man. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a perfect example of kids' movies made for all ages, including adults. Yeah. In fact, especially adults.
Yeah.
Whereas movies like this were very much like, nah, this is for kids.
Yeah.
Adults are not going to get much out of this. But you're making such a good point. The idea of taking 3D technology, this is kind of what started that. And the idea that Robert Rodriguez, I was watching a lot of behind the scenes for Once Upon a Time in Mexico, and then eventually Sin City. He is the kind of guy who, as he was talking over this, he was doing voiceover over this, you know, behind the scenes stories. He was saying, he's basically like holding George Lucas's hand by saying, I want to push the ideas
of digital
forward. Yeah. Digital is cheaper. Digital is easier to make. It saves you money. Why waste money? I want to use CGI effects, visual effects that can enhance my movie. I want to use it in a way to lower my budget and to make it cheaper, to make it easier to shoot on set. He kept saying this over and over again on the behind the scenes of Once Upon a Time in Mexico.
Yeah.
And then the idea that he made an entire 3D movie with CGI, all CGI, and then he did it again with Sin City.
Yeah.
This is all like elevation of him really diving into the CG, all CG environment, 3D special effects world.
Yeah, and you know, I love that he does play with the technology. That he is a more forward thinking filmmaker. I think I've even mentioned this documentary before in other episodes, but the documentary Side by Side, where they talk about the film versus the digital. He was talking about it, and there, and it's also mentioned in the Star Wars How to Conquer the Universe book. But George Lucas had a huge meeting that he invited all the filmmakers to: Martin Scorsese, Spielberg, like all the big directors, Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez was there too. And the only one who was sold on the idea of digital was Robert Rodriguez. He was the only one who was like, hey man, if the creator, if Lucas says it himself, you got to roll with it, you know?
Tell me that documentary.
Side by Side.
Side by Side.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called.
Cool.
Keanu Reeves
I want to see that.
Keanu Reeves is the interviewer on it, and then he interviews a bunch of directors. David Fincher talks a lot about loving shooting on digital. Martin Scorsese talks about loving film. You know, it's like they're all. No, I think Nolan's in it. Maybe I'm not sure.
That's such a good point because I'm telling you, in research for this episode, watching behind the scenes, watching interviews, he's obsessed with it. He's obsessed with digital, with moving technology forward, and making 3D movies and making CG a part of the art of movies. Which, I mean, think about it now. What did we get for last year, if not Avengers: Infinity War? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like this is
it's a little too much CGI, but
well, that's what I'm saying. Like he eventually goes into the realm, I guess you could say, of where critics and people like you, RB3, are saying it's too much CGI, right? But Robert Rodriguez insists that that's part of his artistic style. Something like The Adventures of Shark Boy and Lava Girl is creating an all CG environment and making that an integral part of the movie, an integral part of the story.
Right, 100%. And I think that having digital, being in the forefront of digital is something that really propelled a lot of filmmakers to start thinking about making cheaper movies, and really propelled a lot of studios to draw back the budgets as well, because the idea of shooting on film is just so much more expensive than shooting on digital. Yeah. Too. So I think that's really where, you know, I think it's a lot of people have their opinions about it, have their plus and downs about it. But fact of the matter is, you know, shooting on digital today is really the catalyst to fueling young filmmakers and getting more young filmmakers out there because it's so much more accessible.
That's exactly what he said in his 10-minute film school. He said the point of digital is to make it more accessible. It's to allow you being someone who didn't necessarily go to film school, doesn't necessarily have money or a big name or a studio backing you, you can make a movie. Anyone can make a movie. Anyone can be a filmmaker. Anyone can do it. All you have to do is imagine your movie and do it. Shoot it. Use what you have. That's like his big thing as far as pushing film forward and allowing other people from different backgrounds, from different environments, from different parts of the world to be able to make movies just like him, because that's how he got his start. That's his biggest thing that he's always pushing. And that's so great. And eventually he uses all this, you know, technological advancement to eventually make a movie like Sin City. Now Sin City is him doing all it's basically all CGI.
It's shot. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was all shot on green screen.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So this is him going from Once Upon a Time in Mexico and Spy Kids and stuff like that to going into, you know, watching the behind the scenes of Spy Kids, watching the behind the scenes of Once Upon a Time in Mexico, him being like, you know what, let's do a CGI shot, let's do a CGI creature, let's cut this in post, let's cut this over here, and then going into this obsession where you said with George Lucas into let's just make an all CG movie, and that's what Sin City is. What do you think about Sin City on a technical level and also on a story level?
Well, I think in this case the technical and the story are kind of merged together because it's based on the graphic novel from Frank Miller, and he heavily adapts the style in the form of comic books, in the form of graphic novels, and it adapts that to film. He adapts the artistry of it. He adapts the very crisp black and white. Like every image in this movie feels like it's within a comic book panel in and of itself. You know, the very black minimalist backgrounds, the very sharp pointed lighting, and it's really amazing because the use of that technology, of the digital technology, of the green screen, of the crazy pointed lighting. Both adheres to the comic book aesthetic that the artwork is inspired by, but also the noir aesthetic that was very popular back in the 1930s and 40s. And a lot of times when you see a lot of times when we talk about noir in today's context, a lot of times neo-noir is the new term because that largely represents movies in color, that largely represents movies like Nightcrawler, Chinatown, those kinds of movies. But this movie strictly adheres to the black and white aesthetic, except when it does break for color to emphasize certain characters or certain things. So
it's great. It's like a combination of like a graphic novel come to life. Yeah. Also an homage to noir movies. Also, like it's a different combination of so many different things. I mean, that's why people loved it so much. Sin City is what started this whole idea of making these comic book movies look
like comic books.
Look at Zack Snyder. Yeah. I mean, 300. That's a perfect example.
And another Frank Miller adaptation. But, you know, this came before 300. Yeah. And this really...
That's what I'm saying.
This
like
really
it's
inspired. Yeah. And, you know, even now, Into the Spider-Verse adopts a different kind of comic book aesthetic.
That's true.
The movie literally starts with the comic book seal approval thing in the beginning.
Yeah.
And this movie takes that as well. And, you know, not to also toot this movie too much, you know, not to give this movie too much credit, but it also really inspired the idea of shooting largely on green screen for like these like very very simple stories, and plus it gave a lot more interest into the idea of shooting in black and white too. I'd almost say, you know, because you know, I mean, maybe I'm mistaken here. Maybe you know, I'm being, you know, maybe I'm making a misled point, but I don't really remember a lot of big studio movies being released in black and white.
That's a good point.
Pre-Sin City. At least that I could recollect too. No. But now you see movies like Nebraska. You see movies like Roma. You see a lot of movies that are, you know, this is a much more extreme example, but a lot of movies are adopting a more black and white kind of aesthetic, and I think this movie deserves a lot of credit for that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it really did start quite a few things, and it's so incredible how he's able to combine making a tribute and also making an environment and something that could...
The atmosphere, the texture.
Yeah. And you know what it is? It goes back to something he said back in one of his videos for 10-Minute Film School, which I keep going back to, but that's a great gateway into the mind of Robert Rodriguez. It's him saying, make your own art. Make what you feel your own art. And that's something that he really pushed. He kept saying, anything weird, anything interesting that you like where people might not feel the same way about it, make that your defining factor. Make it your own art form, where people can now look at something and say that's artistic or that's artsy because you're able to put your own label on it. And that's the biggest advice he said he gives you by making your own art, by not being afraid of the word art and making it something that you enjoy and you love and you can dive into. And that's something that he, like you said, he kind of really created this love and fascination for, whether it be 3D, whether it be technology, all this kind of stuff that certain directors have really been at the forefront of. Someone like a James Cameron, someone like George Lucas, especially James Cameron, because he hooked up with Robert Rodriguez, and now he's made Alita Battle Angel, which is another entire CGI movie.
Right. Well, they've been friends for a long time, if I'm not mistaken.
That's what I'm saying. Like, hanging out with someone like a James Cameron, eventually to get a movie that is very much like pushing the technological advancements of CGI and 3D. Again, Lucas, Cameron, those kind of guys who are heavyweights when it comes to this type of stuff.
But meanwhile, you know, hanging out with traditionalists like Tarantino,
exactly,
and you know, and
it's so interesting, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's all over the place, and you know, and again, I talk about the show Director's Chair. I'm a fan, you know, I'm a fan of that show. There's only like 8 episodes of it, I think. But he also talks to Michael Mann in that show as well, who's also a filmmaker who is very starkly film converted to starkly digital. And you know, Michael Mann, you know, has had a wide range of films, but you know, to say that someone who's also on a more dramatic side of directing, or someone who makes, as compared to someone like Cameron and Lucas and Robert Rodriguez, who makes quote unquote genre movies, quote unquote B movies, Michael Mann is somebody who makes like real human genres, who makes like real, you know, gritty like thriller movies, or you know, stuff like that. Yeah. And he finds the form of digital very compelling as well. So again, that's and you know, that's the people who Robert Rodriguez surrounds himself with. Yeah. And you know, he takes a lot of influence. I think Sin City, you know, I don't know, I've never read the graphic novels that is based on, but apparently is very closely adapted, like dialogue wise, from what the graphic novel is. But overall, it has a very stark, very, very heavy, kind of dark tone. It is a little over the top and wacky at some points with the shooting.
But it's Robert Rodriguez.
It's Robert Rodriguez, but you know, it's just how he is. But then it's also very much like in the classic way of noir. It puts you in the eye of the detective and really like makes you sit through those hard-boiled moments. So. Yeah,
it really is one of those things that he kind of it's a kind of a throwback to like a Desperado type feel, where it's like this one solo man diving into this world. A hot girl is dancing, freaking Jessica Alba. Yeah, you can't do it, Robert. Robert just can't. He can't help himself.
Nah, man. And also Carla, a homegirl who was the mom of Spy Kids. Yeah, man, she.
Oh my God! Don't start RB3. Stop it.
Great film.
Let's finish up with the Machete movies.
We don't want to talk about the Shark Boy and Lava Girl or Shorts.
Yeah, but we kind of
yeah, those are the kids' movies. Yeah, I didn't watch Shark Boy and Lava Girl, also in 3D as well. Also a movie I went to see twice. But you know, also Grindhouse too, and Planet Terror.
I forgot he did Planet Terror. He did Grindhouse movies. Again, I'm gonna kind of pull that in with Machete. Because they're B movies. They're essentially,
they're taking from those.
They're clearly movies. This whereas Desperado and From Dusk Till Dawn, not Desperado. Where From Dusk Till Dawn is kind of like you get that feel of like a B movie kind of feel. When he makes these Grindhouse movies like Planet Terror, Machete Kills, is a true Grindhouse movie. It's a true over the top B movie type of feel, and that's what it is. Right. Like that's what you're paying money to see. You're not seeing a blending of the genres. You're not seeing anything else. You're seeing a true B movie, a true movie, but on the big screen.
But you know, Planet Terror is a little bit of a subversion of that. Well, to an extent, it's a of a subversion of that. But it makes the female protagonist, and it gives as much more. Whereas most of these movies would be more of a masculine thing,
like Machete. Yeah, have you seen Machete? You've seen it. It's super hyper machismo, masculine, over the top.
Danny Trejo.
Yeah,
I've never seen. You know, shirt's always off. I love when he like tries to kill. He tries to kill the president. Yeah, is that the first one or the second one?
That's the second one.
That's the second one. Yeah. Nah, all of it. All of these movies are just crazy.
I gotta say. When was it? When my family and I, my brother, and my dad sat down and watched these movies. And I don't know why we get a kick out of it so much, man. Just the idea of like the over the top Mexican guy who's killing all these gringos. Obviously that's not what it is. Right. Just that idea is just so funny to me. There was a promo for this movie Machete. Where there was this really, it's so stupid and funny, but at the same time, it touches on political angle. But there was this law that was going into effect in Arizona. I think it was 2011 or around when the movie was coming out, 2010. Is when the movie came out.
You're right. I remember this.
Yeah, and this was a promo for the movie where the law was racial profiling for Mexicans. Literally,
I forgot what it was.
Stop and search, whatever it's called.
It was a big thing in Arizona. Arizona.
It is,
right?
and I was there during that time, obviously, because this is where I lived. That's where I'm from, Arizona.
Right.
And it was a huge issue, and it was all over the news, and it was discussion. It was a very politically charged framing of like this racist thought process towards Mexicans. And Machete made a promo video with Danny Trejo, and he was just looking at the camera, and he was like, "Hey Arizona, I'm coming for you. Machete is," and he was just going on a speech. And we were in tears, bro. My family and I were cracking up. We thought it was the funniest thing ever, of like this fictional Mexican character coming to take down the corrupt, racist cops of Arizona,
right.
and the policymakers of Arizona, who are racist, by the way. Shout out to them.
Shout out to them. No, that's I had completely I do remember that being a big part of the campaign. And do you think I
think Robert Rodriguez is very clear in what he's trying to say. And what I've been trying to say since the very start of this episode, man, it's the idea of framing of Latino characters, of Mexican characters in movies. Where do we see Mexicans in Breaking Bad? If not evil, psychotic, dangerous criminals. Where do we see Mexicans in Robert Rodriguez's movies? Whether it be Spy Kids, because they're Mexican, shout out to them. Whether it be Machete, whether it be Desperado, whether it be Once Upon a Time in Mexico. If not, taking names and kicking ass. You see what I'm saying? I think that's Robert Rodriguez really showing you, saying, hey, movies have a big impact in ideologies. I told you last week, man, look at what's happening right now on the border. If not everything that Trump is saying, you can turn on a movie or you can turn on Breaking Bad and be like, yep, look at them Mexicans bringing in their drugs. And it's like, it's the kind of stuff that we need to get away from. That's the kind of stuff we don't need right now, especially in this politically charged environment right now, with Trump really putting his foot down on the throat of Latinos, on the throat of Mexicans, really pushing into this racist agenda towards Latin American Mexican immigrants. That to me is so dangerous, to the point that, we need to talk about it. And I like that Robert Rodriguez can not just talk about, make fun of it too, obviously.
I was gonna say, do you think a movie like Machete is helpful to the image, to promote
I'm not saying yes and no to answer your question. Obviously, this came out in 2013, and I'm talking about something that's going on now in 2018, 2019.
Right.
I just think it's a silly, fun B movie where it's a blaxploitation movie for Mexicans. Where a Mexican audience can go in the theater and watch this movie and have fun. That's what Machete is at the end of the day. Just like black people would go into the movie theater and have fun at a blaxploitation movie where it's over the top, big black guy shooting people. You know what I'm saying? Like I can. There's good and bad in both. Obviously, the image of violence for Mexicans is at the forefront of Machete. But at the same time, it's a fun movie where we can cheer for a Mexican guy. That's not something we get, man. Honestly, name a movie in the past. We don't cheer for who? Who are we rooting for? That's why I loved Oberyn Martell so much in Game of Thrones. Obviously, that didn't end well.
Pedro Pascal,
bro. I mean, he's badass, kicking names, Spearmaster, intelligent, a prince, royal. Like, that to me was such a big deal, because I was like, where do we see this in media? We don't get this anymore, man. It's not all positive or negative. It's just an escapism for Mexicans finally seeing their self on screen.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of what we're getting now with Alfonso Cuarón in Roma. The audience I went to in the theater was, half, at least 50% to 60% Mexican. I just think that's something we need nowadays, and I like that Robert Rodriguez, no matter what, he's always pushing that. Even now with Alita, let's finish up with that by talking about Alita. Eventually, what we're going to see, it's still a Latina forefront female character. Like, that's, again, a Latina. Where do you see a badass Latina? Name a movie. Name a show. You see what I'm saying? Like, we don't see that nowadays. And regardless of the quality of the movie, because I haven't seen it yet and we're going to see it, that's, to me, as someone who's a Latino and who wants to see that, and that's why I'm in Hollywood, that's powerful to me. To finally see Latino and Latinas at the forefront of a movie, being a hero, being a heroine, whatever it is. That to me is powerful, and that's why I got to give Robert Rodriguez all the props.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's definitely putting representation at the forefront. Again, I'm not familiar with this graphic novel either, Alita, Battle Angel.
Yeah.
I don't know how
the anime, the manga. It's mainly manga.
It's mainly manga.
Yeah, it's only 5 anime episodes. You can watch it on. You can find it on YouTube.
Is it like a Crunchyroll or something?
No, if you Google it, you can find it.
Oh, okay.
It's like 4 or 5 episodes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, but you know, again, this is another example. This is an example of putting Latino representation in the forefront, and it's also an example of
a 3D CG movie.
3D CG movie that's also an anime adaptation.
That's right.
I'm
so curious about this movie. Man.
Yeah, there's a lot of because right now we're seeing the tail end of 3D. Yeah, we're seeing the tail end of. I don't know if we're seeing the tail end of anime adaptations yet.
No, I think we're gonna start. To be honest, I think once Attack on Titan.
Oh, you think we're going to see more of that? So we're more on
if
the cusp.
Attack on Titan is successful, we're going to see more anime adaptations.
Really? Do you think if this movie's successful, we're going to see a lot? No. Why not?
Because who knows Alita Battle Angel? Who? Like the vast majority of American audiences, Dragon Ball Z, My Hero Academia, Attack on Titan. Maybe Ghost in the Shell a little bit, but those are the big animes right now. Alita Battle Angel, it's a manga. Like not a lot of people read manga. So it's not something that people can be like, well, in the original, there's not that many people who know about the original. So to me, it's very different. It's very different.
But they're putting Alita as like the forefront of the movie.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's great.
So,
but I'm saying as far as anime adaptations, I think it's.
Do you think this is gonna make a lot of money though, or?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I think it's a 50-50 coin toss.
Yeah,
but. Either way, we'll find out.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that was it for this episode. Let us know what is your favorite Robert Rodriguez film. Let us know of our conversation. What do you think about him as a filmmaker? You can find me on Twitter at Squad Leader Ace, and go check out our SoundCloud. Yeah, our SoundCloud. Yes, our SoundCloud. SoundCloud.com. Yeah, / the meaning the. Meaning whatever. It's in the link in the description. You know what I mean? It's too much. Go check it out.
But check it out. And then also check out our YouTube channel, First Cut.
Subscribe.
Yeah, subscribe to our channel. We are still slowly building.
Yeah.
We are currently at 166 subscribers so far. If we listen, people, Collider Factory listeners, if we get to 1,000 subscribers, we start getting paid. All right. So let's run up those numbers. Yeah.
All right, guys. For the Meaning of Podcast, I am Ace.
I'm RB3, and I'm at Director RB3.
Oh, Director RB3.
I didn't say that. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I didn't say that part. No, it's all good.
Either way, guys. For the Meaning of Podcast, we are peacing out. Peace out.